Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here in attendance and testifying on behalf of PennDOT and Transportation. And first, I want to say to Secretary Carroll, thank you not only for your testimony here today, but also for your willingness to reach out. I think it was not very long after you were named as acting secretary that you reached out directly to me, traveled across the state to my district to meet with me, and I really appreciate that. And I think that is a good sign of things to come as far as working in a bipartisan manner to get things done with the transportation sector, as it's really involved in everything. And I want to start out actually and going back a little bit to your predecessor. And I think it's imperative that some things are put on the record with respect to the P3 plan and the bridge tolling plan, which then morphed into this deal with Bridging Pennsylvania Partners. And I think, that we have a duty as legislators to bring that up, to put on the record for not only our constituents, but also everyone that's a part of the Commonwealth. And I just want to highlight some specific areas that, I don't want to go back into all of the history of that plan, and you're well aware of it as you were on the Transportation Committee in the House during that time. And at a time when that initial plan was laid out, there were 9 candidate bridges, and then it got shifted to about 6 bridges. 3 of the original 9, the Girard Point, Bridgeville, and Southbridge, were not included in that original thing, and there were some different estimates on the cost, and at that time the cost was estimated between $550 million to about $2 billion to repair or to replace those 6 bridges. And through months of meetings as well as legislation, Senate Bill 382, which was signed into law, which then eliminated the tolling provision, and still your predecessor moved forward with this contract with Bridging Pennsylvania Partners. And I know that you're well aware of it because we've spoken about that since. The price tag that your predecessor put on the residents of Pennsylvania is, quite frankly, I don't even know if there's a word that can accurately comprehend the unbelievableness, if that's even a word, how cataclysmic that can be. And that $2.2 billion at the high end has now morphed into approximately $5.79 billion over the next 35 years for residents of this Commonwealth. And I know, as I said, we've spoken about this. I know your thoughts on this situation, how this was able to be put through. I don't think that this was the best option, and I've said that ad nauseum from the time that this plan was enacted, that if there was different focus put on, that we would be at a whole different situation than we are now. So that being said, looking down this lens, or looking through this lens for the next 35 years, the enormous price tag that your predecessor put us on the hook, and I know that there's not, or are there options to get out of that? I know I'll leave that to you now to explain, but I'll lead in with the question, was this the best choice for the Commonwealth? And welcome your comments on as what your department has looked at already going forward.
Thank you, Senator. And as you know, I committed to you and other members of the Senate that the decision that was made by the prior secretary would be reconsidered, and we'd consider all possible options with respect to the decision with respect to the 6 bridges. The decision has been made that I support, that the cost to cancel the contract for convenience is prohibitive, even considering the math that you laid out in your opening remarks. The primary concern that the Commonwealth and the administration and that I have is that the credit down rating for the Commonwealth would be tremendously hurtful for the future financing of debt by the Commonwealth. Not to mention the penalty that we would have to pay, somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million to cancel the contract for convenience. So sadly, the decision was made prior to my arrival at the department, prior to the governor being sworn in on January the 17th. And we will go forward with the 6 bridges. As I also committed to you, and the remaining 3 bridges we are going to remove the South Bridge, I-83 bridge over the Susquehanna River here in the Capitol from that package. That process is underway, but that South Bridge will be removed.
And that was actually my next question, and seeing from your testimony before the House Approps Committee that will not be a part of that. The other two bridges, the South Point, or the Jard Point and Bridgeville, where do they fall in?
Our focus for the moment is to remove the South Bridge from the second package.
So that's still open possibly for discussion going forward.
The South Bridge will be removed from the second package.
Now, I want to shift gears now to another issue that I think is pressing and something that we need to get ahead of. And I always use this, I guess, anecdote when I speak in different forms or different engagements with respect to electric vehicles and the revenue that we need to capture in an emerging market. And I had a hearing in Pittsburgh, where's Deputy Secretary Schiff there in the back, that testified with respect to the emerging of electric vehicles and how that's grown in the past. I think it was over a 4-year period. It went from like 9,000 electric vehicles in the Commonwealth to now about 63,000. So we're seeing a continued rise in electric vehicles. You pick up the paper on a daily basis, you see more auto manufacturers shifting their fleet to electric vehicles. I think there was just a report, or the EPA putting some, I think, very aggressive regulations, quite frankly, on fleets turning by 2027 or so, or what have you. But with that being said, electric vehicles now, if you own an electric vehicle in Pennsylvania, you're subject to the alternative fuels tax, which I'm sure you're all very well aware of, that you have to report that to Department of Revenue. And as I've spoken at different symposiums, things of that nature, I always ask, those in attendance, anybody here on an electric vehicle? And usually it's a very small amount, maybe you get one, maybe two. And I continue to speak on that's the revenue that we get from the electric vehicles is through the alternative fuels tax. And I said that at one point to an individual that raised their hand and said he knows that he has to pay that alternative fuels tax. And he was like, yeah, I know. And then after the symposium, then he came up to me and he said, hey, what's this thing you're talking about, the alternative fuels tax? I said, that's a problem. That's an issue. And I've heard that, and as I talk to other people, that's a revenue source that I believe is only capturing about $225,000 across the state. And as we continue to see the rise in electric vehicles, they're using our roadways. And as that, it's an inverse relationship. As that ownership goes up, gasoline vehicles go down. And in part, the motor license fund, of which we get the for the critical infrastructure, goes down as well. So where is the department? I know the department recognizes that need with respect to a potential pilot or a mileage-based user fee for electric vehicles. And that's something that I've actually spoken with the governor about, and I think that there's an appetite for him to be on board. I think that there's an appetite within I'll speak for the Senate, to get something passed like that. So can you speak to where the department is on electric vehicles? And every day that goes by, as that clock ticks, it's more revenue that's being lost within the Commonwealth.
Senator, I recognize and welcome your leadership in this regard. Clearly, there will be more electric vehicles tomorrow than there are today. The proposed regulation that you cited that is being advanced by EPA will accelerate that conversation. Pennsylvania's motor license fund is funded with 75% of its revenue from motor fuel taxes. And that number has leveled off, and there's no expectation that I have that revenue from diesel and gasoline taxes will increase. So we have an electric vehicle fleet that is advancing. The scheme that exists now with the Department of Revenue and people calculating kilowatt hours and doing some mathematical equations and submitting a form and a fee to the Department of Revenue probably needs to be re-examined, and it should be. The administration and the department look forward to working with you and other members of the General Assembly with respect to treatment of electric vehicles to make sure that they pay their fair share My belief is that we have to have a global conversation with respect to electric vehicles and how we treat them in the Commonwealth and the role that they play with respect to the broader conversation relative to our traveling public.
Thank you. I see my time is up. I thank you for your, quite frankly, I thank you for your candidness, and I look forward to working with you here in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.